Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. President Trump declares the war is over as he heads to the Middle East to greet Israeli hostages being handed over after 2 years of bloodshed. S&P futures rebound after the US president signals openness to a trade deal with China. Shares slump in Asia, though, as they catch up with the renewed tariff uncertainty. Plus, a new cabinet for France, as President Macron hopes it will be second time lucky for reappointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. Good morning. So as we keep a close eye, of course, on the events unfolding in Israel and Gaza, the market squarely focused on readjusting to the trade tensions between the US and China. As we said in the headline, President Trump and the Vice President suggesting that there is a window of opportunity to continue negotiations between the two sides. After, of course, that significant sell-off that you saw by the close on Friday. Today, the picture is turning around on the comments from the US President. European futures then, after closing lower by more than 1% by the end of play on Friday, currently pointing up by 0.3%. The FTSE 100, though, currently down 3 points. S&P immies then dropping 2.7%. US markets on Friday on the S&P 500 today pointing higher by 1.3%. Nasdaq 100 futures looking to add 423 points. Quite a turnaround as well after significant selling for the tech-heavy index on Friday, currently pointing higher by 1.7%. So it's risk on across these equity markets after the significant losses on Friday. Of course, Asia is playing that catch-up. We'll get to that shortly. Brent crude up 1.3%. Oil prices higher again on the trade story. $63 a barrel on Brent. Gold, fresh record highs for the yellow metal, up 1% in the session today. Geopolitics tying in to gold. Euro dollar at 116. The single currency largely unchanged. And Bitcoin plummeting on Friday. 114 right now, down 0.3%. The crypto space radically ruptured on the back of some of the adjustments on Friday. Let's flip the board and have a look at the Asia session then. You have had that sell-off continue in Asia on the catch-up, of course, given the comments on Friday from President Trump threatening 100% tariffs. He has moderated that to some extent over the weekend, but the benchmark in Asia is currently down 1.4%. The CSI 300, mainland China, falling 2%, and Hong Kong, you're seeing a lot of selling there as well, down 3.5% on the HSI. Is this a buying opportunity for Chinese tech, or is this just the start of things to come? Has there been complacency in these markets? The Japanese yen at 151, currently a little softer, down 0.5%. Again, further yen weakness. Japan, a national holiday there today. Let's cross over right now, get the latest in terms of the geopolitical story of the moment. And of course, this is Hamas, expected to start releasing Israeli hostages this morning, at any moment, in fact, marking the moment of truth for President Trump's fragile peace deal. Trump is on his way to the Middle East to herald the agreement ending the 2-year Israel-Hamas war. He's scheduled to address Israel's Knesset and greet hostages later today.
The war is over, okay? Do you understand that? I think people are a lot of reasons why it's going to hold, but I think people are tired of it. It's been centuries, okay? Not just recent, it's been centuries. I think people are tired of it. Yeah, the ceasefire is going to hold.
Well, later, world leaders will be at a signing ceremony for the Gaza peace deal in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, of course. Let's go live now to Bloomberg's Dan Williams, though, who is in Jerusalem for us. Dan, what is the latest on the hostages?
Good morning, Tom. Yes, a very consequential day for the Middle East is unfolding fast. Just about an hour before President Trump is due to land in Israel to be feted as a hero among Israelis for managing to bring about a peace deal, a deal ending that 2-year war. An hour before then, we're now looking at the coming minutes, the first of the hostages due to be released in the first stage of that peace plan. That's happening right now within the Gaza Strip. Vehicles from the Red Cross heading out to meet Hamas to receive the first of those hostages. They will then be delivered back to Israel. And I think all sides are hoping that this hostage release will be carried out swiftly without hold-up, so that a reciprocal release by Israel of almost 2,000 jailed Palestinians can also be carried out. thereby putting a line under the first stage of the Trump plan and opening up a path for continued implementation, it is hoped, for a plan that would bring about peace. Obviously, much has to be hammered out, and that is the reason for the president's travel from here later today to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt to meet statesmen from the region, from Europe and elsewhere, to try and bring in as many stakeholders in on that plan and make sure it's done.
Dan, to your point on the summit then in Egypt, as you witness this historic moment in terms of the relationships, of course, in the region, and historic moment, of course, for the people of Israel as well, what is expected to come out of the summit, and to what extent is that likely to build the foundations for phase two, for moving this beyond hostage releases and prisoner releases and a ceasefire to something more consequential?
Well, I don't think we can expect any heavy lifting in terms of negotiations, in terms of agreements. Keep in mind that the US president is on a very, very tight schedule. He'll be in Israel for only a few hours. The same applies to his stay in Egypt. Now, I don't want to say this would be a photo op, but I think this is an opportunity for him to publicly bring aboard a number of stakeholders, people, leaders, countries, publicly committing to see through this plan, make sure it's not forgotten. Because what remains of the plan to be implemented, this is a 20-point plan. What we're seeing today is really the first 2-3 points being implemented, and the heavy lifting on the plan is due in the immediate and ensuing future. It would require Hamas to disarm. Hamas would require persuading to disarm. It would also require some very inventive and constructive plans for the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip, which has been extensively devastated by this war. That requires money, that requires commitment. The president is very keen on loyalty. He's very keen on people meeting their commitments to him. And I think he plans to hold whichever leaders turn up and agree with him at this summit, to hold them to what they say, especially what they say in public.
OK, Bloomberg's Dan Williams on the ground for us in Jerusalem on this momentous day, of course, for the region. Channel 12 reporting that 7 hostages have been handed over to the Red Crescent. So that is the latest in terms of the movements around the hostages. Channel 12 saying 7 hostages were handed over to the Red Crescent. It is understood that Hamas has been holding 20 hostages, live hostages. 7 apparently handed over to the Red Crescent, again, according to reporting from Channel 12. We keep across this story for you, of course, throughout the morning. Now, President Trump's administration, meanwhile, has signalled openness to a deal with China in a bid to quell fresh trade tensions after Friday's sharp stock sell-off. Speaking aboard Air Force One, President Trump called Chinese President Xi Jinping a smart man and a great leader.
I think we're going to be fine with China. Look, I have a great relationship with President Xi. He's a very tough man. He's a very smart man. He's a great leader for their country. He's a great leader. And I have a great relationship with him. I think we'll get it set. I know what happened. I really understand what happened. And I'm not even saying he's wrong. But then we met him with something much tougher than what he did to us. Again, because of the tariffs, it's much tougher.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Balazs Penstein in Hong Kong. So we've seen this back and forth, and clearly the market reaction has been pronounced, Balazs. Are the comments from President Trump seen as a way to address pressure on the equity markets, or is this posturing ahead of a potential meeting with his Chinese counterpart?
Well, there was certainly a sense of reassurance for the markets, and we see European and U.S. assets coming back after that very significant sell-off that we saw on Friday, when markets were jolted out of their complacency over trade. But what else these comments do is they open a bit of room for negotiations and offer some off-ramps for what is the most important trade relationship in the world. But what happened over the weekend and at the end of last week is a reminder to markets and to everybody that we might be in a trade truce between the U.S. and China. We certainly seem to be quite far from a trade peace, and both sides are quite willing to go and press the levers that they have available and go, instead of very kind of incremental changes and negotiations, they are going for really major steps to remind each other of the tools that they have at their disposal. And so that really puts the focus on the upcoming meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi at the end of October coming up.
Balash, talk to us about the relative resilience of the Chinese economy, if that's how we describe it, to these ramped-up tensions then between the two sides. We had some export numbers suggesting that there is still strength there for the manufacturing engine of China. Does the pressure coming down from the US side, how vulnerable is the Chinese economy at this point, or is there that resilience?
Well, I don't think the Chinese economy is in a fantastic shape, but today's numbers do show that there is a lot of muscle still left in the Chinese export machine, in the engine of the Chinese economy. And even as their exports to the U.S. have come down quite significantly, we can see that they are able to find other markets for Chinese products, which does give a little bit more confidence to the Chinese side when it comes to these negotiations. And let's not forget, when they approach these trade talks, they are taking a very long-term view of it, and they're very confident in their ability to withstand what they see as temporary pain. They certainly think that they are more capable of doing that than the U.S. ever is. And perhaps what we saw as a reaction to the market sell-off on Friday, that gives them some more evidence that that is indeed the case.
Balash Spence, thank you very much indeed on the update there in terms of the evolution of US-China trade tensions, of course, that have adjusted over the last 48 hours or so. US futures right now rebounding after gains, of course, for the month were wiped out in Friday's sharp sell-off. It was really pronounced. Nasdaq 100 falling more than 3%. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel right now for the latest. Val, was it an overreaction from the markets on Friday?
It was an all-bad dream on Friday. We closed Friday at the lows. As you mentioned, Nasdaq futures plummeting over 3.5% at the end of Friday's session, but we are coming back up 1.7% in today's trade. I think the question on the market's mind, though, Tom, is this lasting damage to the enthusiasm around the AI trade, around the tech trade in the U.S.? This stark reminder on Friday that trade tensions between the U.S. and China still could escalate meaningfully. The other thing to remember is on markets' minds is whether this Trump-Xi meeting is still in place at the end of the month. If that is still in place, Tom, the market might view all of this as jockeying for leverage ahead of that decision instead of a lasting turn in relations headed towards maybe a potential breakup between the U.S. and China relationship. So that's what markets are thinking after spending most of the weekend in panic. We're happy to see green on the screen for Nasdaq 100 futures. I do want to talk about the Treasury market, though. It was a very interesting price action on Friday, a very sharp rally on Friday in this risk-off sentiment. Now, this is key, Tom, because the last time around on Liberation Day, Treasuries declined in price around this threats around tariffs. So perhaps this is a different way of the market viewing. Perhaps another round of tariffs would be growth negative instead of inflation positive. So that is something to keep in mind. I have prices behind me. The U.S. Treasury market is shut today for a U.S. holiday. But as you can see, a very sharp rally on Friday. We're now erasing some of that in today's session. I do want to mention what's going on in Asia, because as well as we have the Nasdaq futures rebounding, we are at session lows when it comes to a lot of these Asian indices. HS Tech down over 3.5%. And that is good to keep in mind that perhaps sentiment when it comes to Asian equities is not as positive as it is in the U.S. But in some way, this is just catching up to the futures move on Friday's session.
OK, Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel, thank you very much indeed. Breaking down the market reaction, of course, to the latest in terms of the relationships between Beijing and Washington. Here's what else to think about through this week then. On Tuesday, we're going to hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell. Of course, we've had a lack of data as a result of the ongoing government shutdown. So scrutiny, of course, as always, on what the Fed Chair will have to say. That's on Tuesday. We'll bring that for you, of course, all the context and reporting around that. Also on Tuesday, earnings season kicking off with the banks. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs and Citi all bringing out their latest numbers, of course, for the quarter. How well have these banks performed? They've had some very strong quarters recently. Will that continue? And on Wednesday, from banks to the chip-making space, the equipment maker ASML, of course, listed in the Netherlands and key to the supply and production of cutting-edge chips. That company reporting as well. So that's a big one for Europe that we will preview for you and bring you all the latest on. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go, DAYB Go on the terminal, and the focus on US-China tensions and the fact that the US is signalling the door is still open for negotiations. Coming up, the French president reappoints Sébastien Lecornu as prime minister. Can he get a budget passed by year end? That is a question we have asked a number of times this year. We'll explore that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Happy Monday. President Emmanuel Macron has announced a new cabinet in a bid to head off France's growing political crisis. And after being reappointed Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu is racing now to form a government and pass a budget. Let's get more then with Bloomberg's Caroline Connor in Paris. Caroline, Lecornu then reappointed, a new cabinet as well has been named. What is the makeup of that cabinet? How much has actually changed?
I don't know if you know the movie Groundhog Day, but it feels like this in France at the moment, kind of living the same day again and again. So after he resigned last Monday, Lecornu was appointed again on Friday night around 10 p.m. French time, saying he accepted the mission as of duty, that his only mission would be to pass a budget by the end of the year. And clearly he had been discussing with all the opposition parties over the past few days. So Macron thought that his job wasn't done quite yet and that he would be the best positioned. A few new faces in this government from civil society, such as the prefect of police or the former head of the railway company SNCF. Roland Lescure remains as finance minister. He was named last week and said on Friday in Luxembourg he was optimistic about passing a new budget. And Jean-Noël Barrot remains as foreign minister. So a form of stability for some of the big jobs there. But all the heavyweights are kind of out of this government because Lecornu said he wanted to have some cabinet members disconnected from presidential ambitions. So no more Bruno Retailleau there, who slammed the door last week. No more Bruno Le Maire there, who angered the Republicans. No more Elisabeth Borne either, who suggested a few days ago and opened the Pandora box by suggesting that she was ready to suspend the pension reform. Of course, the task is still huge. There will be a first cabinet meeting tomorrow, Tuesday, because President Macron is in Egypt, of course, today. First reaction about this new cabinet last night from Olivier Faure, the first secretary of the Socialist Party. No comment.
Caroline, what makes President Macron and Lecornu think that they can actually succeed this time around then?
We'll see as soon as this week, because both the far right and the far left have said that they would propose the first motions of no confidence to be debated as soon as this week. But since the surprise resignation last Monday, there seems to be a slight change of tone, especially among the socialists, saying they will not necessarily topple this new government, at least if Lecornu is ready to put the suspension of the pension reform back on the table to be debated in Parliament. The Republicans have left the boat. In fact, they said that all the Republican ministers who kept their job in this Lecornu II government will be excluded from the party. But at the same time, they also said they will give their tacit support to this new Lecornu II government. Of course, time is running out because the budget needs to be presented as soon as this week in order to be debated for 70 days in Parliament. So the mountain is still very high, the Parliament is still very fragmented, and it feels again that this is President Macron's last chance before calling snap elections.
OK, Bloomberg's Caroline Connor in Paris on the last chance for President Macron, potentially. So we look to developments there. Caroline, thank you. Meanwhile, we have continuing developments, of course, on the ground in Israel. Israel's Channel 12 saying the hostages have now been handed over to the IDF. The hostages have been handed over to the IDF. We had reports from Channel 12 a couple of minutes ago saying 7 hostages were handed over to the Red Crescent. Those 7 hostages now, it seems, according to Channel 12, have been handed over to the IDF. The next steps we understand then is that the IDF will be, of course, taking those hostages to Raim in Israel, where they're expected to meet up with family members after being held in captivity, of course, for 2 years. Around 20 live hostages have been held, continue to be held by Hamas. 7 now, it seems, with the IDF. We continue, of course, to monitor this for you. Hamas saying they will hand over another group at 10 a.m. local time. So that's in around an hour and a half's time. That is according to Al Jazeera. We'll keep across this story for you. Live pictures there from Raim in Israel. Coming up, the world's progress on clean energy will be the key focus of this week's BloombergNEF summit in London. We discuss the future of renewables. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, the BloombergNEF summit kicks off in London tomorrow, connecting energy leaders from business to investment. Attendees will discuss how technological change and how and when a cleaner, more competitive future might come into view. Joining me now is BloombergNEF's head of analysis, Albert Chung. Albert, thank you for joining us bright and early this morning and set up what to expect from this summit. It's an annual summit. What are we going to be watching for? What are the key themes or the key topics?
Thanks so much for having me. Well, of course, this year we're in a moment where the energy transition is facing some challenges, particularly in the US with the Trump administration. So here in Europe, in London, the focus is really on how does the EU and the UK continue to scale up clean energy, continue to pursue its very ambitious decarbonisation goals, but in a way that aligns with its goals around energy security, but also doesn't raise costs for the consumer. I think it's really important that the industry continues to work on domestic consensus around low carbon and make sure it doesn't lead to higher costs and helps to preserve Europe's competitiveness.
So given some of those challenges, and particularly the radical political shift that we've seen in the US, how much investor appetite is there for this space at this point?
So our research shows that global renewable energy investment is running at an all-time high globally. So around $400 billion was committed to new renewable energy projects in the first half of this year. That's more than any other half-year record that we've seen. Interestingly for me, when I look at the data, Europe is actually driving a lot of that growth. So we're seeing this uptick in offshore wind financings in Europe. Asia is up as well. But the US was down 36% year on year in the first half of this year. So you're seeing the impact of that policy uncertainty, all the tariff changes and all of that playing through.
So that's a major divergence between what's happening in the US versus Europe and the investment flows. What is that doing in terms of the energy transition then, and how that's changing that story?
Well, what we're hearing, at least anecdotally, is that it's making Europe, again, a more attractive place to invest. So a few years ago, there was this narrative that the US had the most favourable regime for clean energy investment globally, the Inflation Reduction Act and everything. Everybody was afraid of capital being sucked out of Europe and into the US. And now you're starting to see anecdotally maybe that some of that capital is going to come back to Europe because Europe has a stable policy regulatory regimes around clean energy investment.
I know this is an area you look at very closely as well, which is grid stability and to what extent the grid is match fit for this new era of renewable energy. Where do we stand on that question?
The answer is that there's still work to do. I think there's a lot of column inches being written about the Iberian blackout a few months ago, and the answer is it's still not totally clear what caused that. What we do know is that grid operators need to have the tools and technologies, the processes, the protocols, and all of those things in place to handle a high renewables penetration in future. That is work in progress that the industry needs to work on. And at the same time, Europe needs to reduce its exposure to international gas markets, which is really its key energy security vulnerability.
Albert, fantastic setup for the event. Good luck to you and the team. Thank you very much indeed. BloombergNEF's head of analysis, Albert Chung. The BloombergNEF summit takes place tomorrow and Wednesday, with the whole event being streamed live. Scan the QR code to watch or head to LiveGo on the terminal. There's plenty more coming up. We'll get back, of course, to events on the ground in Israel. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. President Trump declares the war is over as he heads to the Middle East to greet Israeli hostages being handed over after 2 years of bloodshed. S&P futures rebound after the US president signals openness to a trade deal with China. Shares slump in Asia, though, as they catch up with the renewed tariff uncertainty. Plus, a new cabinet for France as President Macron hopes it will be second time lucky for reappointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. So as we keep a firm eye, of course, and a close eye on what's happening in Israel and Gaza, we bring you the market check, where equity markets are turning around on the front foot then after the heavy losses that came through on Friday with that threat from President Trump in terms of 100% tariffs on China. Since then, as we've been reporting, he has signalled that there is still a window open to negotiation with his partners in Beijing. European futures then on the front foot, up 0.4% after closing lower more than 1% on Friday. FTSE 100 futures now in the green as well, looking to add 6 points. S&P E-minis pointing higher by 1.3% after tumbling 2.7% on Friday. Nasdaq 100 futures pointed to gains of 433 points after plummeting around 3.5% by the close on Friday. Let's flip the board and look cross-asset then. In terms of the focus, Treasury's not trading yet. Japan is closed for a holiday, but Brent is currently up 1.4%. So oil higher on the comments from President Trump around a potential negotiation with China going forward. Gold remains near record highs, 4,072 per troy ounce, up 1.4% in the session today. Euro-dollar at 116. And Bitcoin, which tumbled on Friday, along with other crypto names, and through Saturday as well, currently a little softer by 0.2% at close to 115,000 per coin. Let's return to our top story, though, because Hamas is expected to hand over 20 hostages after publishing their names. We know that 7 of those hostages, according to Channel 12 in Israel, are now with the IDF. President Trump's top envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, negotiated the hostage release, which includes a deal to hand over almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners.
To the Arab leaders and partners of ours who meant so much in this negotiation, including President Erdogan from Turkey, including Sheikh Mohammed from Qatar, including the Emir, including President Sisi, all of whom played a critical and an integral role in this peace deal. I say thank you.
Well, President Trump will meet with many of those leaders later today at a summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Bloomberg's Horizons anchor Jemana Pasechi joins me now. Jemana, just start with what the latest is on the ground in Israel, then maybe look forward to that summit in Egypt then, where some key global leaders will be meeting alongside, of course, President Trump himself.
Well, it's difficult to overstate the significance of this moment, Tom. Thousands of people gathering, waiting for the release of those hostages. About an hour ago, Hamas published the list of 20 names that are going to be released this morning. The latest reporting suggesting that 7 of them have now been handed over to the Red Crescent, the Israeli army, saying that the phased process of retrieving the hostages will begin shortly. And of course, this is a moment that the region, that the families of those hostages, that Israelis and Palestinians have been waiting for 2 years now, and really perhaps does cap an end to what has been a devastating war. In the Palestinian enclave of the Gaza Strip as well, in Khan Yunis, people are also mobilizing there. They're waiting to hear the list of names of the Palestinian detainees and prisoners that are also set to be released. And remember, this was one of the thornier part of the discussions last week. There are a couple of names, some of those Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences in Israeli prisons. And there was a lot of debate as to whether some of them, including the likes of Mohammed Barghouti, would actually be released. It seems as though he's not going to be on that list this morning. And so on both sides, a real feeling that perhaps this marks an end to the devastation, but still very, very early stage, the very early innings of what happens next in terms of whether this short-term ceasefire can actually lead to a permanent ceasefire and even the possibility of broader peace in the region. Now, President Trump himself is expected to land in Israel shortly, in about an hour's time, an hour and a half. He will then be addressing the Knesset and meeting with some of the families of the hostages, later making his way onto Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which of course was the meeting point for so many of the negotiations that took place last week that led to this breakthrough. And he will be there alongside some of the senior leaders from the region, European leaders as well, the likes of UK Prime Minister President Macron, alongside many of those regional leaders that Steve Witkoff actually thanked during that speech in Israel over the course of the weekend. Now, President Trump has called this the beginning of peace, the end of war. But again, many thorny subjects still have to be discussed, including questions about the extent of Hamas disarmament, what future governance of Gaza looks like, what exactly that apolitical Palestinian technocrat government could look like, and the oversight of it, in addition to the extent of IDF withdrawal. So still many unanswered questions. But for now, Tom, really a day of relief and celebration in this part of the world.
Okay, Bloomberg's Germana Pesecci, thank you very much indeed for that important update as we continue, of course, to get additional lines on that. And as Germana was saying, the report suggesting that 7 hostages are now with the IDF and will be, of course, reunited with their families, we expect soon. For more on this, let's bring in Gershon Baskin, co-founder and co-director of the Alliance for Two States. Gershon is a commentator, but also someone who has had hands-on experience now and into the past in terms of mediation, in terms of conversations, in terms of trying to align and create cooperation between two sides. Gershon, thank you for your time. Just start with this moment for us, the reaction to what we're seeing right now in Israel.
There's jubilation, of course. There are more than 100,000 people in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv right now. There are people all around the country on the roads, around the Gaza Strip area with Israeli flags, waiting to greet the hostages as they cross the border back into Israel. The hostages will, of course, meet their families and then fly by helicopter to hospital. We don't know what their physical and mental condition is. That will be known later in the day. It's also a day of a lot of tension because we're also waiting for 28 deceased hostages to be returned by Hamas today and in the coming days as part of the agreement. And we all expect that to happen. So there's a great deal of joy, and there'll be tears of joy, but there's also a great deal of sorrow and a lot of tears of sorrow at the same time.
Yes, the human story. It's hard to overstate the human impact. And as you say, it's uncertain what condition these hostages will be returned in. And, of course, the remains of the deceased as well. Gershon, as you look, someone who's thought very deeply about the future and particularly the prospects of a two-state solution, what is your level of confidence that this will lead to a more meaningful and lasting peace between the two sides?
It's very difficult for the common Israeli or Palestinian to imagine that peace could emerge from this. I look at it very coherently and logically and understand that the horrendous trauma that we've experienced over the last 2 years has to lead to an epiphany in both societies, and understanding that the horrific things that we've experienced over the last 2 years have to lead us to understand that this must be the last Israeli-Palestinian war. We have to wake up to a new age and understand that even after this war, there are 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinians living on the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And the only solution to this conflict remains the two-state solution. That's very difficult for most Israelis and Palestinians to say this morning, but I believe that we will have an awakening because we cannot keep doing this. And we have the help of the international community, which has bought in more than ever before to the two-state solution. And I think that both the Israeli and the Palestinian publics will understand very quickly the consequences of what we have done to each other over the last 2 years, whether it be Palestinians waking up in the morning and looking around them and discovering that Gaza doesn't exist anymore. 2 million people are homeless, no infrastructure, everything's been destroyed. And Israelis waking up to the reality that we have lost too many of our loved ones. We have to stop sending our soldiers to the front to be killed and to come back in boxes. This just cannot go on. I think that the full enlistment of President Trump is here a change in the whole possibility of moving forward with the peace process. We have our own work to do in Israel and Palestine. We must change our leaders, both in Israel and in Palestine, and bring a new generation of leaders who have the ability to look forward to a new day and to understand that we have to make peace. We share this homeland. It belongs to all of us. All of us will remain here, and we have to find a way of doing that.
Gershon, as you talk about new leadership in both Israel and Palestine, what does new leadership in Gaza mean? Who is best placed to take over the running of that territory?
I've been in communication with the last 2 weeks together with a Palestinian colleague with a number of civil society and private sector leaders in Gaza who are willing to stand up and take the job. They've written 2 letters to President to President Trump, which I delivered it through Mr. Witkoff. There are other people in Gaza who have a record of public service who are not connected to Hamas and not directly connected to the Palestinian Authority. In order for whatever government is placed in Gaza, it needs to have some official linkage to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, because that is the address. President Abbas has now been invited to the summit that will take place later today in Cairo, and until a few hours ago he hadn't been invited. So it is a good thing that he will be there, because there needs to be an official Palestinian address. Abbas is committed to conduct national elections in Palestine within a year. That means elections in the West Bank, Gaza, and in East Jerusalem. And it'll be the first time since 2006 that the Palestinians will have the ability to decide who they want to rule them, given that President Abbas has also said that the election law in Palestine will stipulate that only parties that support peace with Israel and two-state solution will be allowed to participate. So there's no chance that a party like Hamas could rise through elections and be selected by the Palestinian people, who no longer want to be ruled by an organization like Hamas.
And when it comes to Israel, Gershon, and the cabinet of the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, including Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who some characterize as having extreme views, certainly very right-wing and hard-right views, to what extent could they be an impediment to progress?
Well, I think that we are scheduled for elections in November 26. I'm not sure that the government will last that long. This deal was voted against by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and members of their party in the government. They are not happy with the government. We'll see what develops. But I think that the spike in popularity that Netanyahu is winning now because of the deal will drop quickly, swiftly, because now that the war is over, the Israeli public will demand a commission of inquiry to determine why Israel failed to protect itself on October 7th. How is it that Netanyahu and his government financially supported Hamas for many years, viewed Hamas as an asset and the Palestinian Authority as a liability? All the bad things that the government of Israel has done, and Netanyahu personally responsible for preventing any kind of peace with the Palestinians since 2009. This will come to play when this war is over, when the hostages are home, when Israeli society begins to heal. And I think we will be going to early elections sometime early in 26, but we'll see.
Gershon Baskin, really, really valuable insights, of course, on a momentous day for Israel and the region, co-founder and co-director of the Alliance for Two States. Thank you. Coming up, the US-China trade war reignites. We're going to discuss what it means then for the markets with Aneeka Gupta from Wisdomtree. Futures, of course, pointing higher in the session today. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. US equity index futures then higher today after President Donald Trump signalled an openness to a deal with China, improving sentiment after, of course, markets were rattled, to say the least, by a sharp escalation in trade tensions on Friday. And you saw that in terms of the rapid moves lower for US equities by the close. Joining me now is Bloomberg Markets correspondent Nora Melinda. Nora, where do equity markets stand from here then? Was it an overreaction on Friday? How much confidence is there that we're going to see a turnaround now, given the moderated language from President Trump and his team over the weekend?
And that's what Wall Street is currently trying to figure out here. I mean, if you think about what we saw on Friday, what we're seeing today is a rebound, definitely a different picture than what we saw on Friday. And of course, this underscores this idea of the taco trade, which essentially means Trump always chickens out here. So you start to see him laying out some trade negotiations going back and forth. You're going to see headlines flying, and then you see him pairing some of the statements that he makes, and then you start to see a rebound here in the market. So that's what a lot of my sources have been telling me could be potentially playing out here, and a lot of them saying that this is a story that a lot of the market has seen before, so not to fret here.
OK, Nora, thank you very much indeed. Nora Melinda with the view there in terms of the adjustments around the markets and maybe the taco trade being back. Let's get another market view right now and bring in Aneeka Gupta, Wisdomtree's Director of Macroeconomic Research. Aneeka, good morning. Is this a buy the dip then? Do you agree? Is this an opportunity maybe to add exposure to US equities given the sharp sell-off that we saw on Friday?
Well, definitely. I think, we have seen a very sharp sell-off over prior to coming into the weekend, but it seems like the new economic data that we've got from China this morning with very strong exports, they've been able to offset some of that weakness from lower exports to the US with much higher exports to the EU as well as the Southeastern Bloc. So that's, that gives a very important signaling message. China has the upper hand when it comes to trade, from the viewpoint of their dominance on the supply chain, on the supply of rare earth metals. And then when it comes to exports, despite all the tariff headlines, despite all the tariff uncertainty, they're thinking over the long term, they've managed to divert a lot of that risk out of the US into and obtain much higher export volumes from other parts of the world. So definitely, I think having that strategic allocation to your underlying portfolio where, strategic metals and rare earth miners really come to dominance is a particular part of the portfolio that you should pay a bit more attention to.
I just wonder if, given that given China thinks it has the upper hand, and you point to the trade data that came out today, whether in fact that's a risk for the markets, because it could lead China to take a harder line than maybe they can afford to do in terms of negotiations with the US. Did at least Friday show that there's some complacency in the markets when it comes to expectations about this trading relationship?
Absolutely. I mean, equity markets are trading at an all-time high, so they are susceptible and vulnerable to these sell-offs. So a headline that comes in where, President Trump is threatening to impose a 100% tariff, obviously in retaliation to China's restrictions on rare earth metals, does call for some caution in the markets. But the point is that as long as China holds this upper hand in these trade negotiations, you have that taco trade evolving, because Trump eventually has to give in because he cannot actually place such high punitive tariffs on China, given the fact that they control really around 80% of supply of rare earth metals. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And I think going forward, clearly the emphasis is now going to be the third quarter earnings results will be front and center. And I think that's where investors' concerns are going to be predominantly focused on.
Where is your lens going to be when it comes to earnings season then, Aneeka? What are you going to be scrutinizing? What are you looking to see?
Well, it's really interesting because yet again we've entered Q3 where consensus expectations are very low. If you reflect over the prior three quarters, Q2 earnings expectations for the S&P 500 came out at 11%. We're now starting with the expectations for Q3 earnings season at 6%. And quarter over quarter over the prior three quarters, we've seen the S&P 500 beat earnings consensus expectations by about 500 basis points. So if you try to break down where that 6% has come from and why it's so much lower than the 11% that we got in Q2, I think first and foremost, a lot of that is predicated on lower growth globally. And I think the second is predicated on the fact that, the tech sector, which accounts for about 30% of the S&P 500, is now slated to have a reduction in overall earnings growth from 30% that we saw in Q2 to now 15%. And I think that's a bit too much of a reduction in consensus expectations. So I think where we would likely end up is, near the upper single digits, so around 9, early 8 or early 9% for Q3 earnings.
Aneeka, we're just bringing a red head across the terminal right now. The IDF, of course, the forces of Israel, reporting that Red Cross has now 7 hostages have been handed to them. Red Cross says 7 hostages have handed to them. The IDF is reporting that. We've been reporting, of course, lines coming through from Channel 12 of Israel that those 7 hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross and then on to the IDF. The IDF saying the Red Cross says that 7 hostages have been handed to them. That is a red head across the terminal. We'll keep across, of course, the events unfolding in Israel as these hostages are returned. Aneeka, pivoting back to the market story and the view around earnings, clearly a challenge for European earnings has been the strength of the euro. To what extent does that continue to be a story in the current quarter?
Yeah, that is likely to weigh on earnings results. I think, we started the year with very high expectations for Europe, and European equities have in lockstep performed very well. But now, obviously, we see that, that tailwind for the U.S. with the weaker dollar being a very strong tailwind for U.S. earnings expectation, now become a headwind for Europe with the stronger euro. And I think that is going to weigh on earnings expectation. But on the flip side, I think what investors are, taking cues from for the earnings season is more higher dividend payouts and more buybacks. And we're seeing more and more of that happen across European corporates.
Okay, Aneeka Gupta, Wisdomtree's Director of Macroeconomic Research, on the market implications of US-China trade tensions. What to think about when it comes to earnings season as well, with US banks reporting this week. Aneeka, thank you very much indeed. There's a lot more coming up. We're going to break down the moves around Bitcoin and silver and some of that export data out of China. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. So the trade data out of China suggesting that Beijing may feel it has a little bit of negotiating leverage then, leading into any conversations between the two presidents. If indeed that meeting still happens, you could, of course, get negotiations between the two sides, potentially as early as this week. We know that President Trump has signaled that maybe he's open to restarting those conversations after, of course, threatening 100% tariffs on Friday. But the trade data came in, exports very strong, and the fastest pace of growth for exports in 6 months. And a significant drop in terms of exports to the US, down about 30%, but more than offset by exports to Europe and Southeast Asia. So that part of the economy is holding up for China, which may make them feel that they have some leverage in any of those conversations. Let's flip the board and have a look at silver, because you've seen a rally there as well, up 75% year to date. Part of that is down to a short squeeze in London. Bitcoin, a bit of a turnaround, but it dropped below 105,000 on Friday. You had about $19 billion wiped out in terms of crypto assets, in terms of the market drop on Friday, linked, of course, to President Trump's threats around China tariffs. Bit of a rebound today. Silver, of course, was in focus. Bitcoin, though, below 105,000, now around 115,000. We keep across that asset for you as well. The open trade is up next. This is Bloomberg.